The electromagnetic storm had already swallowed half the horizon when Elias Venn admitted that continuing across Coldris had become a terrible idea. His crawler shuddered beneath him as violet lightning crawled through the black clouds, briefly illuminating the abandoned mining towers scattered across the plain like broken bones. The navigation screen flickered, displayed 3 different directions at once, then calmly announced, "Optimal route unavailable." Elias tapped the console. "That makes 2 of us." Another pulse struck somewhere nearby, and every system inside the crawler died simultaneously. The vehicle rolled forward several meters before stopping in the dust. Elias sat quietly for a moment, staring at the dark controls. "Excellent," he muttered. "Exactly where I wanted to spend the night." Coldris had once supplied rare superconductive minerals to half a dozen colonies, but the mines had been abandoned after unstable magnetic fields began interfering with machinery and human nervous systems. Now only empty settlements remained, their buildings slowly surrendering to dust and radiation. Elias pulled on his thermal coat, strapped a portable scanner to his wrist, and stepped into the storm. The nearest settlement was less than 2 kilometers away. Walking there seemed unpleasant. Staying beside a dead crawler while lightning attempted to reorganize his molecules seemed worse. By the time he reached the first buildings, fine grey dust covered his boots and hair. Most doors stood open, and faded holographic advertisements continued blinking despite having no customers. One projection promised luxury housing for the modern miner, while displaying a room roughly the size of Elias's old storage closet. "Luxury survived inflation," he whispered. His scanner detected weak power inside an old communications station at the edge of the settlement. Elias entered, hoping to find intact energy cells. Instead, he heard someone breathing. He froze. The sound came from behind a collapsed console. Elias slowly raised his flashlight. A woman sat against the wall, one hand pressed tightly beneath her ribs. Pale blonde hair fell across her face, streaked with dust and blood. At first glance she appeared human, perhaps in her early 30s, but when she lifted her head, he saw the long, elegant ears extending through her hair. Alien, though from one of the humanoid species scattered across the inner systems. Her blue-grey eyes followed the flashlight. "If you're planning to rob me," she said weakly, "you'll be disappointed." Elias lowered the light. "I was actually planning to rob the building." She looked around at the ruined station. "Your standards are low. Traveling teaches humility." He moved closer and noticed the wound. A narrow plasma burn crossed her side, but the dark discoloration surrounding it worried him more than the blood. "That needs treatment." "I'm aware." "Good. Saves us the diagnostic phase." Her expression almost became a smile, then tightened when she shifted. Elias crouched beside her. "Can you walk?" "Yes." She tried to stand and immediately collapsed against the wall. Elias raised an eyebrow. "Strong argument." She stared at him with enough irritation to suggest that, injured or not, she was accustomed to being obeyed. He offered his arm. After a moment, she accepted it. The small house Elias had chosen earlier as emergency shelter contained little more than a table, 2 chairs, a functioning heater, and a maintenance terminal old enough to qualify as archaeology. He helped the woman onto a narrow bed and opened his medical case. "Name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Lyra." "Elias." He cut carefully through the fabric near the wound. Beneath it, he found a sophisticated layer of adaptive armor disguised as ordinary clothing. Interesting. Very interesting. "Refugee?" he asked casually. "Something like that." "From where?" "Far away." Elias nodded. "Ah, my favorite planet." She gave him a warning look. He activated the medical scanner. Red symbols appeared above her injury. The plasma strike had damaged tissue but missed the major organs. Unfortunately, metallic particles embedded in the wound were releasing a low-frequency energy pulse. Elias frowned. "Whoever shot you used military ammunition." Lyra's eyes sharpened. "You recognize it?"
I recognize expensive ways to kill people. He cleaned the wound while she gripped the edge of the bed without making a sound. You can scream, by the way. I won't charge extra. I don't scream. Everyone says that before antiseptic. When the sterilizing field touched the wound, Lyra inhaled sharply and nearly crushed the metal frame beneath her hand.
Elias glanced at the bent rail. All right, technically not screaming. For the first time she laughed, brief and unwilling, but real. Elias finished applying regenerative gel and wrapped the injury with synthetic bandage mesh. While securing it, his eyes caught something beneath the dust on her wrist. A thin silver line running beneath the skin. Not jewelry, a neural command implant. He had seen one once during his years servicing military transports. Officers used them to communicate directly with encrypted tactical networks. Civilians were not allowed to possess them. Lyra noticed where he was looking and pulled her sleeve down. Neither spoke. Outside, thunder rolled across the deserted settlement. Elias closed the medical case slowly. The injured stranger sitting in his borrowed house was no ordinary refugee. The question was not whether she had lied to him. The question was how dangerous the truth would be. The storm intensified after midnight, turning the abandoned settlement into a prison of static and wind. Every few minutes, violet lightning struck the mining towers and sent blue electrical veins crawling across their rusted surfaces. Elias stood beside the window, watching the sky flicker while the house's ancient power regulator complained in a language of clicks and sparks. Behind him, Lyra sat at the table with a thermal blanket around her shoulders, pretending that the wound beneath her ribs did not hurt. She had been pretending for nearly an hour. Elias had decided not to mention the neural implant on her wrist. People carrying classified military hardware rarely became more cooperative when strangers announced that they had noticed it. Instead, he opened 2 emergency ration packs and placed one in front of her. Lyra stared at the grey rectangular substance inside. What is this? Dinner. It appears to have died twice. That means it's thoroughly cooked. She lifted it cautiously with the fork. Humans willingly eat this? Only when restaurants are unavailable or when we're being punished by our governments. She tasted a small piece, stopped chewing, and looked at him with genuine offense. Elias nodded sympathetically. There it is, the universal expression. Despite herself, Lyra smiled. It disappeared quickly, but Elias noticed. He sat opposite her and activated the portable navigation terminal he had recovered from the crawler. A holographic map of Coldris rose between them, unstable lines flickering whenever the storm interfered with the projector. Elias enlarged the surrounding region. Once the magnetic front passes, I can repair the crawler and take you to the southern port. Lyra shook her head immediately. No ports. Fine, northern port. No populated settlements. Elias leaned back. You're surprisingly difficult for someone currently wearing my bandages. Her eyes remained on the map. There are people searching for me. Friends? No. That would have been convenient. Elias studied her face. Bounty hunters? Lyra did not answer. Instead, she reached toward the projection and expanded the orbital traffic layer with 2 precise gestures. If they're intelligent, they won't approach from the southern corridor. Coldris's magnetosphere disrupts passive targeting there. Elias stared at her. You know orbital warfare? I read. What sort of books? She ignored him and rotated the map. A cruiser entering from this vector would need escort vessels here and here, but if the defenders placed destroyers behind the moon's gravity shadow, the cruiser could be forced into a correction burn. Elias lowered his fork. That sounded less like reading and more like personally ruining somebody's afternoon. Lyra's expression remained calm. Strategy is logical. So is plumbing. I still don't know how to redesign a sewage network during dinner. Before she could answer, the navigation terminal emitted a sharp warning tone. A small red symbol appeared above the settlement. Elias leaned forward. Atmospheric contact. Lyra's entire posture changed. The tired woman vanished. Her shoulders straightened, her eyes sharpened, and her voice became suddenly cold.
Kill the lights.
Elias hesitated only a second before obeying. Darkness swallowed the room.
What is it?
He whispered. Lyra moved to the window without making a sound.
Reconnaissance drone.
Elias checked the scanner. Something metallic was descending through the storm, moving slowly between the abandoned structures. Could be old mining equipment.
It isn't.
You sound certain.
Because mining drones don't fly search spirals.
A faint mechanical hum became audible outside. Lyra pulled Elias away from the window.
Shut down the heater, your terminal, everything producing a thermal signature.
You know, Elias whispered while disconnecting the power cell. Ordinary refugees usually ask where the bathroom is before giving counter-surveillance instructions. Perhaps you meet unusually incompetent refugees. The house became completely cold and silent. Elias crouched beside her beneath the window. Through a crack in the shutters, a narrow red scanning beam swept across the street. The drone moved past the neighboring building, paused, then turned toward them. Elias felt Lyra's hand suddenly close around his wrist.
Don't move.
The red beam slid across the outer wall. For several long seconds, the machine hovered directly above the roof. Elias could hear its stabilizers adjusting against the storm. Then another lightning strike exploded nearby, flooding the settlement with electromagnetic noise. The drone turned and continued down the street. Lyra waited until the sound disappeared before releasing him. Elias slowly exhaled.
So, he murmured, still going with ordinary refugee?
She looked at him in the darkness.
I never said ordinary.
That is an impressively technical defense. He reactivated only the smallest battery lamp. Its pale glow illuminated her face. For the first time since he found her, Lyra looked genuinely worried. Not for herself, Elias realized, but because whoever controlled that drone had come close to finding them.
Who are you? He asked quietly.
Lyra held his gaze for several seconds.
Someone who needs to survive until morning.
Elias glanced toward the dark window, then back at the woman who understood military formations, reconnaissance patterns, encrypted implants, and exactly how to disappear from a hunter's sensors.
That, he said, is becoming a very expensive answer.
By the time the storm began to weaken, Elias had stopped pretending that sleep was possible. The reconnaissance drone had not returned, but every distant metallic sound made him look toward the window. Lyra remained on the bed, pale and motionless beneath the thermal blanket. Yet something about the stillness bothered him. He checked the medical scanner again and frowned when the display showed a steady rise in cellular stress around her wound.
That is definitely not what I wanted to see, he muttered.
Lyra opened her eyes.
You say that often.
The universe gives me practice. He moved closer and ran the scanner over her side. The regenerative gel was working, but a cluster of microscopic particles remained embedded beneath the damaged tissue. They were emitting pulses too weak for ordinary equipment to detect, each one repeating at exact intervals. Elias stared at the waveform.
You weren't just shot.
Lyra's expression tightened.
What did you find?
A tracking lattice. Nanoscopic transmitters suspended inside the plasma residue. She sat up despite the pain.
Can you remove them?
With proper surgical equipment? Easily.
And without it?
Elias looked around the abandoned house. That depends on how emotionally attached you are to proper surgical equipment. He crossed to his tool case and began removing components from a broken field regulator, 2 spare induction coils, and the emergency power converter from his crawler. Lyra watched him dismantle machinery with increasing concern. You're building a medical device out of engine parts? That's a very judgmental way to describe innovation. Will it work? Probably.
Probably?
I find confidence misleading at this stage. Elias connected the coils around a small ceramic plate and used the maintenance terminal to generate an oscillating electromagnetic field. The device hummed violently, then spat a spark across the table. Lyra raised an eyebrow.
Reassuring?
That was the ceremonial spark. He adjusted the frequency. Humans developed most of our useful technology because the universe keeps breaking expensive things and refusing refunds. She gave him a tired smile.
Your species explains recklessness as creativity.
We prefer adaptable problem-solving.
Other species call it recklessness.
Other species lack branding. Elias placed the improvised emitter beside her wound and activated the field at minimum strength. Lyra stiffened. The microscopic particles beneath her skin appeared on the scanner as dozens of bright points, then slowly began clustering toward the surface as the magnetic field disrupted their cohesion. Elias increased the frequency. Tell me if this hurts.
It hurts.
Excellent. The diagnostic system remains functional. Lyra gave him a look sharp enough to stop weaker men. Elias grinned and continued working. One by one, the particles emerged into the absorbent medical mesh, tiny black grains flickering with blue light. When the final signal disappeared, the scanner displayed a clean reading. Elias leaned back. Congratulations! Anyone tracking you has just lost their very expensive breadcrumbs. Lyra stared at the dead particles.
Those transmitters are royal military technology.
Elias glanced at her. Interesting choice of adjective. She said nothing. He cleaned the wound again and replaced the bandage. For several minutes, only the fading storm could be heard outside. Then Lyra asked,
Why are you helping me?
Elias paused. You were bleeding.
That isn't an answer.
It's usually sufficient.
You could have left me in the communications station. Whoever is searching for me could kill you.
Elias shrugged. People keep mentioning that as though it improves my decision-making. She watched him carefully.
You don't know who I am.
Correct.
You don't know what I've done.
Also correct.
And you still helped me.
Elias closed the medical case. Bleeding strangers rarely carry convenient wallets, so I learned not to demand payment first. A quiet laugh escaped her, softer than before. Then she became serious.
There are powerful people trying to destabilize my world. If they succeed, entire systems could fall into war.
Elias studied her. Your world?
My people,
she corrected quickly. You talk like someone who signs treaties.
Perhaps I read those too.
Very educational library you came from. Lyra looked away, but he noticed the tension in her jaw. Some knowledge becomes unavoidable when responsibility is placed upon you. That sentence sounded heavier than anything she had said all night. Elias did not press her. Instead, he handed her a cup of warmed water. Drink.
Is this another human medical procedure?
No. This is me preventing my patient from becoming dehydrated, because apparently I've been promoted to physician without salary. She accepted the cup.
You complain constantly.
It keeps me balanced. Lyra drank slowly, then rested her head against the wall. For the first time, her guarded expression softened completely.
Elias?
Yes?
If morning comes quietly, I will tell you more.
He glanced toward the window. Beyond the settlement, the last violet lightning faded behind the mountains. That sounds dangerously optimistic. As if summoned by the remark, his scanner gave a single warning tone. Elias looked down. 3 heat signatures had appeared at the northern edge of the settlement, then 4 more, then 8, all moving toward the house. He stared at the display and sighed. There, optimism has been officially cancelled. Lyra was already standing. The heat signatures divided before they reached the settlement, moving with the clean precision of people who had rehearsed this kind of hunt before. Elias watched the scanner while Lyra tightened the bandage beneath her coat and crossed to the darkened window.
8,
he whispered.
10.
she corrected.
2 are masking their thermal output.
Elias looked at her. Of course they are. He pulled the maintenance terminal from the table. I was worried this evening might become relaxing. A faint engine note drifted through the abandoned streets. Lyra's expression hardened.
They'll surround the house first.
You know their tactics?
I know how trained retrieval units operate.
That sentence somehow created more questions than it answered. She turned toward him.
You need to leave.
Elias stopped connecting his terminal to the building's ancient power network. That again?
They came for me. If they find you here, they will assume you helped me.
That seems fair. I did.
Elias.
Her voice carried sudden authority, the same tone she had used when the drone appeared.
Go south. There are service tunnels beneath the processing facility. You can reach your crawler before they establish a perimeter.
He stared at her for a second. And you?
I'll draw them away.
With a plasma wound and one functioning side?
I've survived worse.
You also claimed you could walk yesterday. Your credibility has suffered. Outside, a metallic click echoed from somewhere nearby. Elias killed the terminal screen. Besides, abandoning wounded guests would damage my reputation.
You're a traveler.
Exactly. Reputation is all I have.
And a broken crawler.
Thank you for remembering. The first mercenary entered the street wearing matte black armor that absorbed the pale morning light. A second figure followed, then another. Their helmets carried narrow sensor arrays instead of visors. Lyra stepped away from the window.
We have less than a minute.
Elias grabbed his tool bag. Then we should waste at least 20 seconds arguing. She almost smiled despite herself.
You are impossible.
That's what several mechanics have written on my invoices. They left through the rear storage room and crossed into an alley just as a scanning beam passed across the front wall. Lyra led him toward an old freight elevator buried beneath rubble. The control panel was dead. Elias pried it open. Please tell me you know another entrance. I do. He looked relieved. Where? 3 kilometers east. I suddenly love this elevator. He attached a portable cell to the emergency contacts. Sparks snapped across the panel, and the doors opened 10 centimeters. Together they forced them wider and slipped inside the shaft. A maintenance ladder descended into darkness. Above them, amplified voices ordered the house occupants to surrender. Elias looked down. You first. Why? If I fall, you can catch me. And if I fall, I'll make a sincere effort to look surprised. Lyra shook her head and began descending. The tunnel below had once carried magnetic ore carts beneath the settlement. Emergency strips still glowed faintly along the walls, powered by buried geothermal cells. They had gone perhaps 200 meters when Lyra suddenly raised a hand. Elias heard boots behind them. Fast, he muttered. They knew about the tunnels. Then let's become unpredictable. He opened his tool bag and pulled out a remote maintenance key. Ahead stood 3 dormant construction drones, squat machines with articulated cutting arms. Elias connected wirelessly to the nearest one. Its status display blinked awake. Unauthorized activation, it announced loudly. Lyra winced. Subtle. I never promised subtle. Elias overrode the safety mode and sent the machines rolling backward toward their pursuers. One drone immediately began repeating, Caution! Industrial equipment operating. Maintain safe distance. Gunfire erupted farther down the tunnel. The drone continued cheerfully. Failure to maintain safe distance may result in injury. Elias grinned. I like him. You've known him 4 seconds. Some friendships are immediate. They ran deeper underground while plasma bolts flashed behind them. At the next junction, Lyra stopped abruptly. Left. Elias checked the old tunnel map. My terminal says right. Your terminal is using mining records from 30 years ago. The right tunnel collapsed after seismic activity. Elias stared at her. How do you know that?
She hesitated, half a heartbeat too long. I studied Coldris. Naturally. They turned left. Moments later, the tunnel behind them shook as an explosion destroyed one of the drones. The ceiling lights flickered. Lyra's breathing became strained, but she refused to slow. Elias finally caught her arm. You're bleeding again. Keep moving. Wonderful medical advice. He supported her until they reached an emergency exit beneath an abandoned hangar. His damaged spacecraft sat inside, half covered in dust, exactly where he had left it weeks earlier while waiting for replacement parts. Lyra stared at the battered hull. That flies? Your confidence is touching. I'm asking scientifically. Elias opened the hatch.
Scientifically, it has flown before. Before they could enter, a deep vibration rolled through the ground. Lyra froze. Elias looked upward as the hangar roof began glowing with reflected light. His scanner flooded with alerts. One contact became 50, then hundreds, appearing in orbit faster than the system could count them. Massive vessels were dropping out of hyperspace above Coldris. Elias stared at the display. Please tell me those are yours. Lyra looked toward the sky, and for the first time since he had met her, fear disappeared completely from her face. They are not the people hunting me. Elias swallowed. That answer was carefully worded. She met his eyes. There is something I should have told you. He glanced at the growing fleet signature. I had begun to suspect that. The first shadow crossed the settlement before Elias could ask another question. He stepped out from beneath the damaged hangar roof and looked up. The morning sky above Coldris had become crowded with warships, enormous silver vessels emerging from hyperspace one after another until the clouds themselves seemed trapped beneath metal. Their hulls reflected the fading violet storm, and lines of blue energy moved across their armor like illuminated veins. Elias slowly lowered his scanner. That is either a rescue fleet, he said, or the most expensive possible way to ruin my day. Lyra stood beside him, one hand pressed against her wounded side. She was no longer afraid. That unsettled him more than the ships. They found me, she said quietly. You say that as though it's good news. It is. A formation of smaller craft detached from the nearest cruiser and descended toward the settlement. Elias's scanner identified military engines, atmospheric shields, weapon systems, and encrypted communication channels so advanced that his device simply gave up attempting to decode them. Very reassuring, he muttered. My scanner has decided ignorance is healthier. Lyra glanced at him. Stay close to me. That sentence has historically preceded trouble. The first dropship landed hard enough to send dust racing across the empty streets. Then another arrived, and another. Armored soldiers emerged in disciplined ranks, carrying long plasma rifles against their chests. Their armor bore a symbol Elias recognized from trading stations across the inner systems, a silver star enclosed by 3 rings, the royal insignia of the Asterian dominion. Elias turned slowly toward Lyra. Her pale blonde hair moved in the wind, revealing the long, elegant ears he had noticed when they first met. She looked exhausted, dirty, and wounded. Nothing about her explained why an entire royal battle group had just descended around them. Lyra, he said carefully, this feels like the moment where you mentioned the tiny detail you forgot. She did not answer. More soldiers filled the street. Behind them came taller figures in ceremonial black armor lined with silver circuitry. One of them removed his helmet. He was an older alien man with grey hair and the same long ears as Lyra. The moment he saw her, his expression changed. Your Majesty. Elias blinked. The commander dropped to one knee. Every soldier behind him did the same. The movement traveled through the street like a wave. Hundreds of armored warriors knelt in complete silence before the woman Elias had fed emergency rations to several hours earlier. Elias stared at Lyra, then at the soldiers, then back at Lyra. Majesty? She closed her eyes briefly. Elias. No, I'm enjoying the surprise. The commander bowed his head. Queen Lyra Vaelaris, sovereign of the Asterian Dominion, we have searched every sector since your shuttle disappeared. Elias slowly rubbed his face. Queen. Lyra gave him an apologetic look. Yes. Actual queen? There is generally only one kind. I don't know. I'm discovering many things this morning. The commander rose and rushed toward her, but Lyra lifted one hand. The human stays beside me. The man stopped immediately. His eyes moved to Elias, taking in his dusty coat, tool bag, blood-stained bandages, and expression of profound betrayal. Who is he? The reason I am alive. Silence followed. Elias pointed at himself. That sounded far more impressive than the actual process. Most of it involved bad food and improvised electronics. Several soldiers looked at him strangely. Lyra almost smiled. The commander examined her bandage. You were wounded. Plasma strike. Tracking particles were embedded in the wound. His face hardened. Then how were they removed? Lyra nodded toward Elias. He built a field extractor. The commander stared at him. With what equipment? Elias lifted the tool bag. Engine parts, mostly. The commander looked offended on behalf of medical science. That should not work. I hear that often. Suddenly an alarm sounded from one of the soldiers' helmets. 3 red markers appeared in the air above the settlement. Hostile signatures, someone called. The mercenary unit is attempting evacuation. Lyra's expression changed instantly. The wounded refugee disappeared. The ruler remained. Seal the northern valley. No orbital bombardment. I want prisoners. The commander bowed. At once, Majesty. And disable their communications before they can transmit. Already underway. Lyra looked toward the mountains. No, they will be using burst signals through the old mining relays. Destroy Relay 7 first, then jam the eastern frequency band. The commander hesitated, clearly impressed that she knew the terrain despite her condition. Yes, Majesty. Elias watched the soldiers move. Commands spread through the fleet above them, and distant flashes appeared across the horizon as fighters changed course. He looked at Lyra differently now. Every strange detail from the previous night suddenly fit together. The tactical knowledge, the neural implant, the authority in her voice, the refusal to identify herself. So when you said powerful people wanted you dead, I was simplifying. You simplified quite aggressively. Would you have treated me differently if I had told you? Elias considered that. I might have improved dinner. Lyra laughed, and several nearby soldiers looked startled by the sound. The commander returned. Majesty, your flagship is prepared. Medical personnel are waiting. Lyra nodded, but before moving toward the dropship, she turned to Elias. You're coming with me. He stared at the massive royal cruiser hanging above the clouds. Do I have a choice? Of course. Good. You may come willingly, or I can order them to carry you. Elias looked at the kneeling soldiers, then at her. I'm beginning to understand monarchy. 3 weeks after the storm on Coldris, Elias stood beneath a ceiling made of transparent crystal and watched 2 moons move slowly above the capital of the Asterian Dominion. The palace had been built around an ancient gravitational core, so entire gardens floated between its towers, connected by silver bridges suspended in open air. He had seen stranger things during his travels, but never anything quite so determined to make a man feel underdressed. He looked down at the formal coat someone had placed in his quarters that morning and muttered, I miss pockets. A palace attendant beside him pretended not to hear. The conspiracy had ended more quickly than Elias expected. Councillor Thuran had confessed after investigators recovered encrypted assassination orders from his cruiser, and the remaining conspirators were arrested across 4 systems. The mercenaries captured on Coldris confirmed that Lyra's shuttle had been sabotaged deliberately, forcing her toward a region where she could be hunted without witnesses. The failed quantum network attack had provided the final link between Thuran and the military officers who supported him. Even Elias's improvised extraction device had become evidence,
because the tracking particles still carried the conspirator's encryption signature. Somewhere in the royal archives, he had been informed, his ugly little machine was now officially classified as critical forensic technology. Elias considered this the greatest insult it had ever received. His own ship had also been repaired, although the royal engineers had replaced so many systems that he was uncertain whether it could legally be considered the same vessel. The propulsion unit was now Asterian military grade. The navigation computer had predictive hyperspace mapping. Someone had even installed heated seats. Elias had stared at those longest. Civilization, he decided, had finally achieved something meaningful. Yet despite having a ship capable of leaving that morning, he remained. That realization bothered him more than he expected. For years, traveling had been easy because staying anywhere meant accepting obligations, and obligations had a habit of becoming people one could lose. Coldris had changed something. He had begun that night helping Lyra because she was injured. Somewhere between reconnaissance drones, mercenaries, royal fleets, and attempted coups, he had discovered that protecting someone could become more than an inconvenient moral reflex. It could become a reason to stop running. The throne chamber doors opened. Elias entered expecting half the government. Instead, only Lyra waited at the far end of the enormous hall. She wore a simple silver dress rather than ceremonial armor, her pale blonde hair falling freely around her long ears. No crown rested on her head. "Where is everyone?" Elias asked. "I sent them away." "That sounds dangerously efficient." "I wanted this conversation without an audience." He approached until only a few steps separated them. "Should I be worried?" "Usually." Her smile appeared, familiar now. "But not today." She activated a small holographic projector. A symbol formed between them, his name beneath the royal star. "The council approved a new position this morning. Royal Technical Advisor for Frontier Systems and Independent Operations." Elias stared at it. "That sounds suspiciously respectable." "You would answer directly to me." "Less respectable." "You would be free to travel whenever you wished. You would also have access to royal engineering facilities, classified research stations, and every vessel in the exploration fleet." Elias narrowed his eyes. "You're bribing me with machinery." "I was advised to offer money." "Your advisors don't know me." "I'm learning." He walked slowly toward the window overlooking the capital. Far below, streams of civilian craft moved between towering structures while orbital rings glowed against the afternoon sky. "Why me?" he asked. Lyra joined him. "Because when everyone else around me knew I was queen, their decisions were shaped by what I represented. You didn't know." "I thought you were a suspicious refugee with terrible survival instincts." "Exactly." "That is not usually considered a qualification." "It is to me." Her voice softened. "You helped someone you believed had nothing to give you. You argued with me when I was wrong. You made jokes when I was afraid. And when you discovered the truth, you continued treating me like the same person." Elias looked at her. "You were the same person." For a moment, the throne room seemed impossibly quiet. Then Lyra said, "That is why I want you here." Elias glanced back at the holographic appointment. "I have conditions." She raised an eyebrow. "Of course you do." "First, palace medical staff must never learn exactly how often I injure myself repairing engines." "Denied. They already requested records." "Traitors." "Second, no ceremonial clothing without pockets." Lyra laughed. "Agreed." "Third, if I ever have to bandage royalty again, I'm charging double." "That condition may be difficult." Elias sighed theatrically. "Then I suppose I accept." Lyra's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough for him to understand that the answer mattered more than the position itself. "Good." Later that evening, Elias stood aboard his repaired ship, while royal technicians completed final checks. He could have chosen any destination. For the first time in years, he entered none. Instead, he watched Lyra's palace through the cockpit glass as the city lights appeared below. His old life had been built around motion, around leaving before places became important. Now the universe had given him something different, a reason to return. His communicator chimed. Lyra's voice came through. "Elias, are you still aboard that ship?" "Possibly. You're expected at dinner. Is the food better than emergency rations?" "Marginally." High praise. "And Elias?" "Yes?" "Don't disappear." He looked once at the open stars beyond the planet, then shut down the engines. Not tonight. For the first time, staying did not feel like surrender. It felt like arriving.